Chapter 2 of the Calvary Chapel Distinctives is about church government. For some of you, you might wonder why this chapter is included. 30 years ago, I might have agreed with you. When we started our church, I wrestled with some of the issues dealt with in this chapter. In the early years of Calvary Fullerton, we even had a church split over this. And while I'm not sure that one type of church government is necessarily better than another, I found the hard way that it's essential that those in leadership at least be on the same page. As we read about in the book, there's three basic types of church government. There's the congregational form, which is very common today. It's traditional among Baptists. The church votes on everything. There are committees for everything. I think it goes well in America because of the concept of every member having a vote. But I would be hard-pressed to find any examples of this in the Bible. The Presbyterian form is one based on elders. There will be a council of elders who make all the decisions for the church. The pastor is hired by the elders. He reports to the elders. We see this in Presbyterian churches, of course, but also some independent Bible churches. The Episcopal form is based on having a single person oversee the church. Sometimes the hierarchy is just within the church, as with a pastor who oversees the church. Sometimes the hierarchy extends beyond into the denomination, where a bishop would oversee the pastor and archbishops over the bishops, and etc. This type of government is not only in the Episcopal Church, but is also found in the Methodist Church and is the way the Catholic Church is run. The Catholic Church is not a democracy. To be honest, there are flaws in each model of church government. Why? Because all of them involve human beings, and humans are flawed. A congregational church will run into problems when an individual joins the church who really isn't very spiritually minded and just wants to control things and exert influence behind the scenes. The Presbyterian model can run into problems when a pastor starts feeling God leading him in a certain direction, but the board disagrees. The pastor has to do what the board says because he works for the board. The Episcopal model can run into problems when the senior pastor has no accountability and he kind of goes off the rails a little bit. Let's talk about some leadership terms. There are several terms in the New Testament that is used for those who lead. To be honest, it's hard to take these terms and put them into a single comprehensive working model of how things should operate. First, there's the word elder. The Greek word is presbyteros, which means an old person. It's a term of rank or office. It's used for those who preside over assemblies or over churches. And this is the origin of the word Presbyterian itself. Is the term elder the same as pastor? Well, to some, yes, and to some, no. The church picked up this title of elder, actually, from the Jews, from the Sanhedrin. When you trace the usage of this term in the New Testament, the first 25 times it appears in the New Testament, it refers to the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jewish nation. It does not start referring to elders in the church until Acts chapter 11, verse 30. Secondly, there's the term bishop. The Greek word is episkopos, which literally means an overseer. It's a man charged with the duty of seeing that things to be done by others are done rightly. He's an overseer. It's a boss. This is the origin of the word episcopal. Well, is the term bishop the same as a pastor? Again, it depends on who you ask. The terms elder and bishop actually seem to be used interchangeably at times in the New Testament. When Paul writes to Titus, he says, "For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you." And you skip to the next verse. In verse 7, "For a bishop must be blameless." And he goes on and describes what the qualifications of a bishop, but he's using them interchangeably. A third term is the word pastor. The Greek word that's usually translates as poimen, which is the word for shepherd. And this term isn't really used too much as a title, but you see it used to describe how leaders are to lead, how they are to shepherd the church, the flock of God. When Peter writes to leaders, He seems to use all three terms, elders, pastors, and overseers, all interchangeably. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 3, he says, "The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed." He says, "Shepherd the flock of God," and that's that word for pastor. "Shepherd the flock which is among you, not serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock." Now, there are places in the New Testament where there seems to be one elder in a church. There are also places where there's more than one elder in a church. And if this isn't confusing, there's the title of deacon that's used for leaders. And I think you can make a case in Revelation chapters 2 and 3 that when Jesus writes to the angels of the churches, he's writing to the pastor of each church. The term angel simply means a messenger. The New Testament is fairly vague as to what church government should look like, and that's probably why we have so many differing models. Pastor Chuck coined a phrase, the Moses model of church government. Moses had developed two distinct groups of leaders within the nation of Israel. The first group was known as the elders. After Israel had crossed the Red Sea, Moses faced the task of creating some sort of functioning society with this group of 2 million freed slaves. At first, Moses handled all the problems, all the disputes, all by himself. But it became obvious when everyone was coming to him that he needed to learn to delegate. It was his father-in-law, Jethro, that came up with this idea, and he said, "And let these elders, let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you." This group would form the beginnings of a civil government. Now, the second group of leaders in Israel were the priests. And as you read through Exodus and Leviticus, you see God giving instruction to Moses about how he wants to be worshipped. The priests were the ones who helped Moses with the people's connection to God. They were the spiritual leaders of the nation. So our church has developed its government along the lines of this Moses model. In one sense, we have an episcopal form of government in that the senior pastor is the main guy who leads, who guides the church. Though the Calvary Chapel movement has a board of pastors that oversee what we call the affiliation process, that's really the process that decides whether or not you can call yourself a Calvary Chapel. This board does not exercise any control over the churches. Each church is independent. Under our senior pastor, we have 2, maybe even 3 groups of leaders. We have a board of elders that helps the senior pastor with oversight of the church. This is kind of parallel with Israel's elders under Moses, the ones who helped form the civil government. Our board is not the senior pastor's boss, but they give guidance and input mostly to finances when it comes to approving finances and setting policies. The senior pastor has a limit as to how much money he can authorize, how much money he can spend at a time. But anything over that amount must be approved by the board. That helps protect the senior pastor from accusations of financial abuse. Our assistant pastors are kind of similar to the priests in Israel in that they help the senior pastor with the spiritual aspects of the church. They help run the various ministries of the church. And we currently have 3 full-time assistant pastors helping our senior pastor. And there's another group of folks who are not ordained or paid pastors, but who help with various ministries. They don't really have titles as such. In a way, you could say that maybe they're like the deacons of the church. It might be the person leading a connect group. It might be the person who handles the accounting of the church. It might be a person organizing the ushers, or maybe a coffee ministry or the women's ministry. Now, that church split that I mentioned at the beginning, how did our church split over church government? In our early years, I thought I was being generous and magnanimous to allow fellows onto our board of elders who came from various church backgrounds. I thought it showed that I wasn't being narrow-minded. And we had several fellows, all really good men, who had come from a church background that you could probably classify as Presbyterian. Some of these fellows felt that the board of elders ought to be the ones who ran the ministries of the church. They wanted to have our worship leader report to an elder who was not a part of the worship team, didn't know anything about music. They wanted our youth pastor to report to an elder who was not a part of that ministry. They wanted the women's ministry leader to report to another elder. I felt that as the senior pastor, these spiritual ministries ought to be under my supervision, not the board's. When I suggested that the board ought to start reading the Calvary Chapel's Distinctives together to make sure that we understand what a Calvary Chapel was all about, these men decided it was time to leave the church. The problem was not really these men, but in the fact that I did not realize how important it is for leaders to be on the same page. And ever since that time, we made it a point to make sure that before a man is brought onto the board of elders, they must agree with the principles outlined in the Calvary Distinctives. It was an important lesson for me to think about the organization of the church, the structure of church government. I hope that helps.